little bit of a surprise there, huh? To see that. I don't think even the industry expected to see Trump come out on top, Kathy.
I don't think anyone expected it. And, on Friday we talked to Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law's attorney, and he said, even he was watching at 6:30 the night of the election and thinking, there's no way. So even, the inner circle had no idea that this upset was going to happen.
And who else is in that inner circle? I know that Trump has been close to certain people. He's off the industry, but he's also sort of floating outside of it, and he always has been, but he's got some people that he's close to.
I think we don't really see him at industry events like we would other major developers. You don't see him turning up at the Ravni Gala. He's not sort of around. But he does have a couple of really close friends, and he, would say himself it's Howard Lorber, Richard Lafrac. He would count Steve Roth. So there's sort of a very small collection of people that he would name in his inner circle, and a couple of those people were on his economics advisory committee.
Right, which we're still not sure what that means exactly, right?
Steve Roth said he didn't really have any involvement in it, so we're not sure what that means.
And then, Will, the morning after we started calling around, we spoke to some. What was the initial reaction from the industry?
We did. I think the initial reaction was largely along partisan lines, and the same partisan lines they were along before the election. Whereas, if you were taking an Instagram selfie of yourself in a Make America Great Again hat before the election, you were likely to be doing it after it as well. And I think that's what you saw in the real estate industry. Those who were very supportive of Trump to begin with, were excited about the election. Those who didn't really like to talk about it continued not liking to talk about it. And of course, those who were outraged by the idea of Trump as president continued to be outraged.
Konrad, anything to add to that? We had heard that the markets were going to be in complete tatters if Trump took the election. That obviously didn't happen.
It didn't happen, and it was a crazy Thursday for the markets initially. So what happened was very early in the morning, markets crashed. And they recovered pretty quickly, and REITs did well. So that was an interesting development. So it's not just that markets overall did pretty well, it's also the REITs, and especially REITs, that focus heavily on New York City, where obviously Donald Trump's from, where he has his industry connections, did pretty well. So Steve Roth's Vornado Realty Trust, its stock was up, I forget the exact figure, but it was up significantly, it did pretty well. So there seems to be a sentiment among investors, first of all, that Donald Trump's going to enact policies that are good for real estate, and then secondly, the companies that have been close to Donald Trump anyway are probably not going to suffer under a presidency.
Is there also a sense that he's not going to interfere with them? He's more of a free market. That's what he seems to be, at least at this point. Like, he's all about deregulation. Is that something they're also enthused by?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's specifically, this relates to financial market deregulation, right? I mean, stock markets are Wall Street. He wants to deregulate Wall Street. He's talked about repealing Dodd-Frank. It seems to be happening. So this is generally speaking a boon to financial markets. And the economic stimulus he's talked about, massive infrastructure spending, it's going to be a boom to the economy, and I think people are happy about it.
One person that you didn't mention, Kathy, and someone who's very close to him, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, he came out. I mean, he comes from a long line of Democratic, that family, the Kushner family, has been a major Democratic force in New Jersey politics. However, he came in and he took the central role in the campaign, and his star sort of rose in the campaign as it went along. Now he's essentially put his father-in-law in the White House. What's the reaction to that, and where does he go from here?
Well, I think, we wrote a Jared Kushner profile a few months before the election, and then we did sort of a follow-up at the end of last week. And I think among his peers in the industry, there's just still this question mark as to, what motivated him in his support of Trump, and in his very, very close support of Trump. Everyone's been saying that he's the one person that always has Donald Trump's ear.
He's always lurking behind after everyone else is gone on the debate stage.
And we talked about the other day on the New York Times front cover with Trump accepting the presidency. Jared was sort of in the frame to his left. But yeah, there's that question of what this means for Jared going forward, and whether he will want to be invested more in Washington, or whether he'll be staying here and focusing on his business, and what that might mean for his business if he's moving away.
There's an ethical question there too, because if the campaign is any indication, it seems like Jared Kushner is not going to take an official role in the White House. He's certainly not going to be chief of staff. That's Reince Priebus. It doesn't seem like he's going to have any cabinet posts, but clearly he's going to talk to Donald Trump. He's going to walk in and out of the White House. He's going to be an advisor unofficially, and he's still going to run his real estate company, and that's an issue. That's a potential conflict of interest, and that's something I think that we have to monitor very closely going forward.
It's a pretty remarkable rise for him. I mean, he bought The Observer in 2006, and it was an influential paper, but in a very small circle, and now he's got this giant platform. Will, what are we seeing in terms of the Trump organization itself?
Yeah, one of the major concerns is even if the Trump children are running the Trump organization, that it's just not enough distance between the company and Trump, and that some legal experts have suggested that really the best thing for him to do would even have his own children leave the company. In response to this, Rudy Giuliani, of course, said yesterday that he's not likely to put his kids out of a job anytime soon.
Right.
So if they're not going to work in the White House, the idea that they're not going to work at the Trump organization does not seem very likely. And the Trump organization has been pretty consistent about what their vision is for the company when and if Trump becomes president. Early on in the campaign, Trump himself and his kids said that once Donald becomes president, the three of them will run the company equally. That's what they're saying now. That's I was talking to one ex-Trump executive who worked for the company for about a decade. That person basically said the same thing, that's what they would expect to see the company do too.
Mm-hmm. And you've covered this company. In 2013, you wrote sort of an exhaustive look at Donald Trump's assets. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, it's a very different company than standard development companies, right? It really is built around Donald Trump and his personality, as opposed to other companies.
Well, I think what's kind of interesting is that, detractors of Trump kept saying along the campaign trail that he has so much debt, he owes so much money, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't really. I mean, when we took a look at his assets, it's stuff that he's owned for a very long time. It's 40 Wall Street, it's Trump Tower, it's the Nike Time building on 57th Street. And, there's very, very little debt on those properties. It's mostly just sort of a management business at this point. It's a licensing and a management business. And I think another point that's kind of interesting is, when people looked at Jared Kushner going up to the election, it looked like his stock was dropping in New York circles. People were saying, what's he doing? Why is he doing this? And Ivanka's stock was dropping too. People were saying that we're not going to buy her brand anymore, etc. And if you look at today, not only is he one of the biggest developers in New York, he also has an ear to the president. And if Ivanka takes the reins at the Trump organization, which she might, since she seems to be, one of the kids that has Donald's ear the most, that really makes them, one of the most powerful couples in the country.
What is their reputation in the industry as real estate people? Donald Trump we know, but Ivanka, Eric, Don Jr.
I think that they're typically not seen as being part of the fabric of the real estate industry. Much like Donald, you don't see them around. They're not at events. They're not making deals because it is a management business. They're not out there trying to acquire or sell. They're sitting on what they have and they're operating it, and they're seen as sort of polite, well-bred, nice children, I think.
Even the people in the industry that support him don't necessarily see him as a real estate developer in the sense that they are. Even people who support him describe him as a brilliant promoter, a brilliant marketer. So even those who are receptive to Donald Trump really see him more of this personality and brand than an actual builder of buildings.
And another reason probably why at least Don Jr. and Eric don't have as high a profile in the industry as Donald Trump does is because they were very much in their father's shadow the whole time, right? I mean, Donald Trump was the big figure that ran the company. He was the figurehead. He was out in the press, and his kids, they were in the press, but they weren't the main people running the company. So it'll be interesting to see whether this changes now that they have to apparently run the company on his behalf.
Has there been any concern on the policy front, or are developers either sort of enthusiastic about what's to come on the policy front from him? Has he spoken about any of the key issues that impact the industry, 1031 exchanges, real estate taxes? Has he spoken about that yet, or during the course of his campaign?
Yeah, so there seems to be a general sense in the real estate industry that people believe that he will implement policies that are good for real estate, which isn't surprising. He was brought up in the real estate industry. He has a pro-business mindset. So I talked to a lobbyist a couple of days ago who told me that she's been getting non-stop calls pretty much for the last few days from real estate developers who want to get a hold of Donald Trump, who want to figure out who's going to be the main contact man, how do I get a hold of the presidential administration, and the idea being, Donald Trump is receptive to policies that will be good for real estate. We want to make sure he actually implements them. So what he's said so far, I think, would be a boon to real estate. He said he wants to spend more on infrastructure, which is obviously great for real estate. First of all, public-private partnerships, real estate companies could actually work on those deals. Secondly, better infrastructure tends to be good for property values, so that's a boon. He's talked about the importance of low interest rates, which is really important to the real estate industry. And then the biggest issue, according to most lobbyists I've talked to, is low income taxes. So Donald Trump wants to cut top federal income tax rate by quite a bit, and that would just leave more money in the pockets of real estate developers.
And what about in terms of the people who spoke out against him when you were reporting your story, or earlier on, any of you? Is there any sense that they're going to be, not persecuted? The persecute is not the word, but are they worried that this is going to impact their business? Have we seen that yet? Has anyone talked about that?
I don't think so. One of the more interesting interviews that I think we've done in the wake of the election was one that I did with Jeff Green on Friday, and
the shrimp cocktail interview.
Yeah, he was very anti-Trump. They actually live next door, a few houses away in Palm Beach, and I read something he'd said to CNBC or one of the TV networks saying that it was his worst nightmare that Trump would become president. Then we talked to him on Friday, and he really changed his tune a little bit, and he told a really funny anecdote about them having dinner at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, and it was a dinner for 500 people, and he was sitting with Trump, and they didn't have enough shrimp cocktail sauce for the shrimp cocktail. He's like, well, Donald was on it, if that's how he's going to run his administration, then we're in good hands. So that, I thought that was hilarious.
That's the real estate industry for you. If you remember when Bill de Blasio got elected, right? He's very left-wing. He was not popular at all in the real estate industry.
He had said something about it's time for a fundamental reset with the developer community. That was his thing.
Yeah, he was supposed to be anti-real estate, and the real estate industry was anti-de Blasio. And then he got elected, and all of a sudden, no one said anything bad about Bill de Blasio anymore. And it's very telling. I think the real estate industry has this mindset where whoever is in power, we're going to have a good relationship with because it's going to be good for us. And if you're Donald Trump's enemy while he's in the White House, you have pretty much nothing to gain. And I think people realize that. So that's why you see a lot of people, I think, who we know quite certainly oppose Donald Trump in private, now come out in favor of him in public.
In the last 6 months to a year, there has been more open criticism of de Blasio, maybe because they see that the power, he's not as, there is a chance that someone else could, emerge as a contender. It's not as one way as it was. There are some more people speaking out, and I wonder if, depending on how the first term goes, if more people will emerge once there's, maybe if there's any shaky ground in the presidency.
It'll be interesting to see.
Just one last note on this is that there were a lot of investors and real estate developers that saw the election of Donald Trump as a possible destabilizing factor on the economy, and I think there is still some worry about that. There's not a clear sense of what he will and won't do, and a lot of people look at the last 8 years and say these have been really great years for real estate in New York City. What's been happening has been mostly good for us. We don't really know what's going to happen now.
But there's still across the board criticism of President Obama, right? That's pretty standard in the industry. You'll hear that a lot.
Yeah, it's funny when politics that don't necessarily have to do anything with the direct business concerns come into conflict with the fact that business has been very good for some of those same critics.